The room was already coming apart when they realized I was gone. On the 23rd floor of Halden Dynamics, the screens bled red error messages, data failures, client escalations, compliance breaches. The air was thick with panic. Someone from the Ellison account was shouting through the speakerphone, threatening to terminate their contract if the system wasn't fixed within the hour. Papers scattered as executives argued over whose fault it was. Byron Wallace, the regional director, slammed his palm against the conference table. "Where is Lena Corwin?" No one answered. At that exact moment, I was standing in my kitchen 10 miles away, flipping pancakes for my son. The morning light cut across the counter, soft and gold, a strange contrast to the chaos I could imagine unfolding downtown. My phone buzzed beside the coffee pot again and again. When I finally turned it over, the screen glared with 57 missed calls, all work numbers. I turned down the stove flame and watched the bubbles rise on the surface of the pancakes. Evan hummed under his breath, drawing superheroes in the flour dust on the counter. He looked up and grinned. "You're home early again." "Looks that way," I said. The phone kept vibrating, steady and insistent. I could picture Byron's furrowed brow, Elaine's clipped tone, the interns running for cables and printouts, all of them searching through my guides, the ones no one had bothered to read until now. 3 days ago, Elaine had looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're not leadership material." I'd smiled then too, just like I was smiling now. The phone finally stopped ringing. In the sudden quiet, I heard the syrup bottle click open, the soft scrape of Evan's fork against his plate. I poured myself coffee, black and calm, the way I'd always liked it. "Mom," he said. "Aren't you going to answer?" I glanced at the phone, then back at him. "No," I said softly. "They'll figure it out." He laughed, not understanding. I took a sip of coffee, watching the steam rise like smoke. "Funny," I murmured. "How the system collapses the moment you stop holding it up." 3 days earlier, I sat across from Elaine Durand in her immaculate glass office, my proposal binder resting between us like an unopened promise. I had spent weeks building it data charts, workflow analyses, a roadmap for scaling our operations. Every page carried pieces of the nights I'd traded for progress. Elaine skimmed the first 2 pages, then leaned back in her leather chair. Expression unreadable. "You're reliable, Lena," she said finally. "But reliability isn't leadership. You execute beautifully, but you don't inspire." The sentence landed like a verdict. She adjusted her gold bracelet, eyes already flicking toward the window. "We're looking for vision, someone who motivates people, not just systems. Maybe in a year or 2. I folded my hands together to keep them from shaking. "I've led every crisis recovery this department has had for 5 years, I said quietly. "I trained the new analysts, built every process document we use." Elaine offered a thin smile. "And that's exactly why we depend on you. But leadership isn't about doing everything yourself." Something inside me cracked a soft, soundless break. When she dismissed me, I thanked her for her time and left without showing the tremor in my chest. Outside, the winter light had already turned the Charlotte skyline to silver. The cold air stung my face as I walked to the parking garage. I sat in my car for a long time, hands on the steering wheel, watching the office tower glow behind me. My breath fogged the glass, fading as quickly as the loyalty I'd carried for years. Reliable, not visionary. Maybe that's what she saw because I'd made it too easy for her to see nothing else. I'd kept the systems too smooth, the fires too hidden. I opened my laptop and began typing. Letter of resignation, effective immediately. The words appeared calm, almost sterile, but they felt like oxygen after suffocation. Tomorrow, I decided I'd hand it to her and stop writing the guides that kept her perfect world from falling apart. 5 years earlier, Halden Dynamics had been a storm disguised as a company. The operations floor looked like a battlefield of misplaced files and unanswered calls. Clients complained daily. Deadlines bled into each other, and no one could explain how anything worked or why it didn't. I still remember my first week passwords scrawled on sticky notes, servers crashing mid-upload, and a half-finished spreadsheet labeled "Do Not Touch." Elaine had just been promoted to department head then. She walked through the mess with designer heels and a confident smile, promising corporate that she would stabilize the transition. She never looked back once she closed her office door, so I stayed late, night after night. I rebuilt the wreckage she didn't want to see. I mapped every workflow, traced every client request, created color-coded manuals so detailed they could run the department without me if anyone cared to read them. I automated the invoicing errors that had cost us hundreds of hours. I taught myself scripts to sync data between systems, one small fix at a time. Within a year, the chaos quieted, clients returned, reports ran smoothly. The company started calling our division Halden's backbone. Elaine presented quarterly updates to the executive board with glossy slides, each labeled Department Achievements. I sat 2 rows back, applauding, invisible but content. I didn't need credit then. My reward was the quiet hum of a system that finally worked, the steady rhythm of problems solved before they reached anyone's inbox. That was enough, or so I told myself, but over time, invisibility hardened around me like glass. The better I made things, the less anyone noticed. My work became the silence that everyone took for granted. By the 5th year, the company couldn't function without the blueprint I'd built, and I had become the one person they assumed would never leave. Maybe that's why Elaine could look me in the eye and say I wasn't leadership material. In her world, leaders spoke loudly. In mine, they built foundations no one ever saw. The next morning, I arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, no earlier, no later. The security guard at the front desk blinked at me in surprise. He was used to seeing me 2 hours before anyone else. I smiled, signed in, and took the elevator like a visitor instead of a caretaker. At my desk, the usual hum of morning chaos began: overlapping voices, unanswered emails, the faint buzz of half-working printers. Normally, I would already be drafting briefing notes for Elaine's 9 a.m. management call, anticipating her questions before she even asked them. That morning, I opened my inbox and waited. When the first request came an urgent scheduling conflict for Lawford account, I replied politely, "That falls under procurement's scope," copying Diane for follow-up. A minute later, Peter from accounting appeared at my desk, looking bewildered. "Hey, Lena, did you see the issue with the vendor forms? They're all bouncing back." "Yes," I said, still typing. I forwarded it to IT. He hesitated, searching my face for a trace of the old me, the one who would stay after hours untangling broken spreadsheets until everything clicked again. "So, you're not handling it. I'm focusing on my assigned tasks," I said gently. "That's what leaders want. Right accountability within scope." He left without replying. The rest of the day passed in an odd stillness. I watched small problems begin to multiply, like hairline cracks spreading across glass. The system was holding, but just barely. For the first time in years, I didn't rush to patch it. At 5 p.m., exactly, I shut down my computer, packed my bag, and walked out. The city air felt different, warmer, lighter, at home. Evan stood on a stool, measuring sugar for cookies. "You're home early," he said, smiling. I decided to be. I answered. We baked until the kitchen filled with the scent of butter and chocolate. My phone buzzed on the counter, screen lighting up with messages from the office. I turned it face down and leaned against the counter, breathing in the quiet. It was such a small thing, doing nothing, but after years of fixing everything, it felt like an earthquake. By the 3rd morning, the silence had started to echo. It began with a message from Ellison Enterprises, urgent, flagged red, copied to every executive at Halden Dynamics. Their integration module had failed overnight, and without immediate intervention, they were threatening to terminate their contract. That account alone represented nearly a quarter of the department's annual revenue. At my old desk, I could imagine the tension building like static. The compliance review was also due that week, an audit requiring data only I knew how to compile. It was all there, documented in my guides. But those files were a maze to anyone who hadn't built them. Elaine tried to lead the recovery herself. I pictured her scrolling through the folders I'd labeled operational systems, master files, clicking through tabs she didn't understand. 200 pages of explanations she'd never bothered to read. I'd written them for moments like this, though not quite with this outcome in mind. By late afternoon, the first voicemail came through. Her voice was sharp, strained. "Lena, I need your input on the Ellison issue. Just a quick call back, please." An hour later, another. "Where exactly are the source logs for Module C? I can't find anything labeled integration." Then, a third softer, almost pleading. "Please, just fix this. I know you can." I sat at my kitchen table, the glow from my phone reflecting against the coffee mug beside me. Each buzz felt like a heartbeat from a world I no longer lived in. By evening, the counter on my screen read 57 missed calls. I turned the device face down. Evan had fallen asleep on the couch, one arm draped over a pile of his drawings. I tucked a blanket around him and stood for a long moment, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. The house smelled faintly of cookies and calm. Somewhere downtown, alarms were going off in a glass tower. I exhaled slowly and whispered to the dark, "Let it burn if it must." By Monday morning, the quiet had turned into panic loud enough to travel through walls. At 8:15, my phone rang again, this time from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but the name on the screen made me pause. Byron Wallace, Regional Director. Elaine's boss. My boss's boss. "Lena." He began the moment I answered, his voice measured but urgent. "I'd like to meet with you today, preferably in person." I hesitated. "Is this about Ellison?" "It's about a lot more than Ellison." An hour later, I was sitting across from him in a downtown cafe. He looked tired, though he hid it well behind his polished composure. "You've built something remarkable at Halden," he said, folding his hands. "The past few days have made that clear. I want to make this right." He slid a folder across the table, Halden letterhead, official offer inside, Director of Operational Systems, double your current salary, report directly to me. It was the kind of position people spent their entire careers chasing. I read the first line carefully, then closed the folder and placed it back on the table. "I appreciate that," I said evenly. "But another company already reached out to me over the weekend." Byron blinked, caught between surprise and calculation. "You're considering leaving. I'm considering my options." He leaned back, studying me. "We want you here." "Lena, name your terms." I stirred my coffee slowly, feeling the weight of his words. For years, I'd watched people like him decide my worth with a glance at a spreadsheet. Now the numbers were in my hands. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Could you send the offer in writing? I want to review it properly." Of course. When I left the cafe, the winter wind bit at my cheeks, sharp and alive. My phone buzzed again, a follow-up email, just as promised. For the first time in 5 years, Halden Dynamics wasn't defining my future. I was. That night, I sat on my sister's porch, the smell of antiseptic still faint on her scrubs. Marcy had just finished a 12-hour nursing shift, but she listened without interruption as I told her everything: the offer, the panic at Halden, Elaine's frantic messages. When I was done, she leaned back in her chair and exhaled. "If you go back, they'll probably demote her," she said quietly. "After what she did, maybe that's fair." "Maybe," I said, tracing the rim of my mug. "But if she falls, someone else will just take her place. Same system, same problem." Marcy looked at me with that blunt, sisterly honesty that had always kept me grounded. "So, what do you want? Lena, payback or peace?" I thought of Evan asleep at home, of the calm I'd found these past days, of the quiet satisfaction in letting the structure I built reveal its own worth. "Neither," I said finally. I want change. Revenge fixes nothing. The next morning, I met Byron at his office. The offer letter sat neatly on his desk, now signed by 2 executives. He gestured toward it. I hope the terms are acceptable. They're generous, I said, but I have conditions. His brows lifted. Go on. First, full hiring authority for 3 positions. I need people I can trust to rebuild the system properly. He nodded once. Reasonable. Second, I continued. Elaine stays, but her department reports through the new workflow division I'll lead. She can focus on clients while we fix the foundation. Byron studied me for a long moment before leaning back in his chair. The edge of surprise softened into respect. You could have asked for her removal. I'm not interested in removals, I said. I'm interested in results. He smiled faintly, the kind that comes from understanding rather than agreement. That's leadership, he said. We'll move forward as you outlined. When I walked out of his office, the morning air felt cleaner than it had in weeks. I wasn't going back to the same company. I was returning to rebuild it on my own terms. When I walked back into Halden Dynamics, the air felt different, familiar, but sharper somehow, like a place I'd known too well and was now seeing with new eyes. The chatter quieted as I crossed the operations floor. People glanced up from their desks, unsure whether to greet me as a returning colleague or something else entirely. I didn't head straight to Elaine's office or the corner conference room. Instead, I sat at my old workstation, opened a blank document, and began mapping the recovery plan. Not the version where I fixed every broken piece myself, but one that let others step forward and own their part. Over the next weeks, I built a small team, a data analyst from accounting who had a knack for pattern recognition, a junior coordinator from HR who noticed every procedural gap, and a quiet IT specialist who had been overlooked for years. We rebuilt processes from the inside out. I guided them, corrected when needed, and let them make decisions I once would have made alone. By the end of the first month, the Ellison account had stabilized. By the third, client retention was up by 15%, and overtime had dropped by nearly half. The tension that used to hang over the office had been replaced with quiet confidence. People started leaving on time again. The lights in the hallway turned off earlier. Elaine stopped by my desk one afternoon, holding 2 cups of coffee. She looked tired but lighter, as if she'd stopped pretending to have all the answers. You were right about the documentation, she said, and about me. I took the coffee, waiting. I said you weren't leadership material, she went on, voice low. The truth is, I couldn't afford to lose you. You were the one holding everything together. I smiled. Not unkindly. Good leaders develop people, even when it costs them comfort. She nodded once and walked away. I turned back to my screen, the hum of quiet work filling the room. For the first time, it didn't feel like weight on my shoulders. It felt like a system finally standing on its own. The announcement came on a quiet Tuesday morning. I was reviewing progress reports when the company-wide email appeared in my inbox. Subject promotion announcement. Vice President of Operational Systems. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. My name looked strange in bold letters, sitting there between corporate logos and formal congratulations. The message was short, but the part that made me pause wasn't the title, it was the line beneath it. The board recognizes Lena Corwin for her exceptional leadership and for developing the Corwin model, a mentorship and documentation framework now being implemented across all divisions. A name on a model, not because I demanded it, but because the system itself had proven its worth. When I looked up, the office had already started to shift. A few people clapped softly, others smiled in quiet acknowledgement. Elaine sent me a brief nod from across the floor. Respectful, almost grateful. The rest of the day moved as it always did, meetings, reports, phone calls, but everything felt lighter, as if the building itself had taken a deep breath. That evening, I left on time. Evan's school fair was in full swing when I arrived, paper lanterns, laughter, the smell of popcorn drifting through the gym. He spotted me from across the room and ran straight into my arms. You made it, he said, eyes bright. Of course I did, I answered, smoothing his hair. I promised, didn't I? We spent the evening wandering between science projects and art tables, his hand gripping mine the whole time, for the first time in years. I wasn't checking messages or calculating what I'd left undone. The world felt smaller, but it finally fit the right way. Later, after he'd fallen asleep in the back seat, I sat for a while in the driveway, watching the porch light glow against the dark. Real leadership, I realized, wasn't about control or recognition. It was about designing something that could keep running long after you stepped away, and knowing you'd built it well enough to let it. 6 months later, my office looked out over the same skyline that once felt unreachable. The city hadn't changed, but the view had. Mornings were quieter now, coffee in hand. Emails reduced to a manageable rhythm, a life no longer dictated by someone else's urgency. That Monday, between back-to-back meetings, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I let it ring through. When I checked the voicemail later, the voice was polite, practiced the kind that never revealed too much. Ms. Corwin, this is Dana from Executive Talent Search. I wanted to inform you that Elaine Duran's position has opened following her resignation. We're compiling recommendations for her replacement. If you have anyone in mind, please reach out. For a moment, I just listened to the hum at the end of the message. There was no satisfaction in it, no flash of triumph, just a quiet sense of completion. I archived the voicemail and returned to my work. That evening, the office lights dimmed around me. On my desk sat a growing stack of mentorship applications, women from across departments asking to join the leadership program we'd built. Some were analysts, others administrative staff or project coordinators. Each letter carried the same thread of hope I'd once felt, but never spoken aloud. I stayed late reading them, one by one, until the first hints of dawn brushed against the glass. The city was still half asleep, bathed in soft gold, and for the first time in a long while, I felt no need to hurry. I selected the first 3 applicants for interviews and marked the next review session on my calendar. As I closed my laptop, the office fell completely silent. I looked out over the waking city and whispered the words that had once haunted me. Leadership material, I said softly, almost to myself. It's not something they grant you. It's something you prove by standing up once and never sitting back down. The sun broke over the horizon, flooding the room with light. I turned toward it, ready for another ordinary, extraordinary day.